Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conversation about AI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I think if there is a theme at Cannes this year, it has to be about AI. And so instead of trying to boil the ocean on it, our focus today is very much on the impact of AI and hiring, and specifically how it impacts our goal of increasing diversity in hiring. And I would like to welcome our panel today. Starting at the far end, Stacey Graham, Global Director, Racial Equity Program with WPP. Welcome, Stacey.
Thank you.
Mona Khalil, who is Head of Data Science at Greenhouse. Welcome, Mona.
Thank you.
And last but not least, right next to me, Tony Hobley, who's Chief DE&I Officer of the Omnicom Precision team. Welcome, Tony. I would like to give our guests a quick opportunity, or not so quick actually, to talk through the scope of their role within their organizations and talk a little bit about what their companies are doing in AI and talent today. Tony, can I ask you to go first?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Where do I start? So my role in the company is to help. How I think of my role, I'm the Chief DE&I Officer, but my role is really about helping to change the default identity and to bring more people to the table and to integrate the concept of inclusion into how we run the business, our employee experience, and then how we service our clients. And give me the second part again.
The second part is, how is Omnicom Precision using AI today?
Okay. Well, the very nature of the word precision implies that data's always been at the center of the value proposition. We have some amazing agencies that focus primarily on, they come from the CRM space, they come from the customer experience, sort of digital experience space, and from the management consulting sort of technology space. And in all of those, data, modeling, all of the facets of what we're gonna talk about today are resident in what we do for clients. And I think we're racing to experiment and roll out ways to do that. And I'll start, I guess, on the client side, because that's the most robust place, I think, and that's the most natural place. How we target, how we build content, how we measure and optimize, how we produce the work that we produce. There's AI sort of inherent in all of those things. And we just made an announcement today in the Wall Street Journal that talked about generative AI and how we've got a partnership with Microsoft that's building that into all of our processes. So it's a very robust part of what we do. It's changing, and it's going to continue to change that. I think the more interesting place for me in terms of what I do is the employee experience side.
Yes.
And how we think about how it shows up in, frankly, the way that we look at the health of the company, how our employees are moving around, how we're representing different voices, how we're doing L&D, how we're hiring, how we're promoting people. Right. So I think that's the place where I'm really sort of excited to delve into the power of this. It's going to change that side too.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're going to explore that a little bit more in the coming minutes. Mona, how about you? What's Greenhouse doing?
So our team at Greenhouse, specifically the data science team, focuses on any type of data research, insights, or support in investigating new technology that enables the product to move forward, to make our customers better at hiring. Nowadays, we've had a very big focus on generative AI. I think like a lot of our research has been figuring out how we actually want to use it in the product in a way that aligns with our values and helps our customers align with their values. So I think that leads into your next question around how Greenhouse uses AI. I'll say, first of all, we use it carefully. We don't use it to evaluate candidates. That's one of our public-facing ethical commitments. We will never use AI to make a decision for you to choose a person for you for a role, because we don't believe that's appropriate. And the technology is just, like, that is not what it's designed for. So nowadays, what we've been doing is specifically research into how we can surface insights, intelligence, information to help you make the best decision that you can for your role. We're in the process of researching, hopefully, some very large feature enhancements. I think if there's time, we can dig into any of those if there's interest later on.
Right, absolutely. Curious to hear a bit more about that. Stacey, how about you?
So I am the global director for WPP's Racial Equity Program. The Racial Equity Program refers to our $30 million commitment to advance racial equity over 3 years. So I have a privilege of leading that. And I'll come back to that for some specific examples and how we're using AI. More broadly, obviously, AI is a big conversation at WPP. Some of you might have read the announcement that was made about our partnership with NVIDIA. Our CEO will be on the stage at the Palais today talking about that in conversation with NVIDIA's CEO. We have some great examples of how we have used it also to meet other commitments, like our ESG commitments. So in that partnership with NVIDIA, we have created the opportunity to place, for example, products in different environments that no longer require us to go send a team to a shoot, the production costs, the transportation costs involved with that. That helps us meet our sustainability goals. Also, very specifically with the Racial Equity Program, there are 2 projects that I'd like to highlight. One called Impact Index, which is in the media area, where we support clients in ensuring that their communications don't show up on sites that are considered toxic. And so we're focusing first on what that looks like for the racial, social identity category, but we hope to expand that across intersections. And then a second example is RG Black, which really looks at the tools that our creatives are using every day. And they've created a platform to show that how much bias is already embedded in things like Photoshop, Lightroom, and other tools that you use every day. Just one really interesting thing I want to mention there is we surveyed creatives using those tools, and they felt confident that bias was minimized in those tools. Oh, wow. And that might surprise you, but that's a really important point, because the origins of RG Black was looking at the use of analog photography and the Shirley cards decades ago, which has meant that people with darker complexions don't show up well in photography. Right. And so they've transferred that understanding to what does that mean today with your DSLR cameras and the tools that you're using to find color balance in those images. So I would say WPP broadly is doing both things that are very specific to the subject of DEIB, as well as things that you wouldn't necessarily relate to that.
Right. That's so interesting. And the topic about surveys may be something that I just want to pick up on. In preparation for this discussion, Greenhouse conducted a survey. We reached 3,000 respondents. That is a mix of candidates and HR leaders / talent leaders, to try and understand kind of their perception about AI and bias. What was interesting in that survey is that 27% of candidates believed that bias was not going to be mitigated. In fact, bias was going to be worse as a result of, so implicit bias in these large language models. And actually, while a lot of HR leaders and TA leaders are using AI, they also, 37% of them believe that bias is not effectively addressed through these tools, which kind of led to the topic of this particular discussion. So since we've gone from absolute zero talk about AI to everyone talking about AI in a very short space of time, the thing that I'd like to ask you all is, why is it important for us to actually be paying such close attention to AI? And what is this? What is the care and the ethics that we need to think about when using this technology? Mona, I think I'm going to ask you to go first, and then Stacey potentially second.
I think my answer would have differed before ChatGPT was released, actually. Yes. Beforehand, I know our team was very loud about the potential impact of bias in AI, because nearly every tool that we saw, like you said, was not successfully mitigating bias. In fact, if anything, most of the research that we've seen shows that it just enhances existing biases, because algorithms identify patterns underlying whatever set of data that you use to train it, and bias is a pretty clear pattern in nearly any data set that you look at. In fact, it's probably one of the most prevalent sets of patterns. So I think a lot of it beforehand was about starting and really focusing on, I think, the algorithms that were very secretly being put into different areas of our lives, and that's, I think, still very, very relevant. But there's a very new focus now on AI with generative AI, where it's like the output and the ability to interact with is just accessible to the general population in a way it's never been. So it's almost, in some ways, easier to talk about it because there is a lot of fear around loss of jobs around it. There's a fear around the quality of content, the potential bias associated with it. But there's also an interest in just everybody using it for a whole variety of different purposes. So the conversation around how to approach, like, raising awareness around the implications of bias in AI have just changed. It's, I think, in some ways very, very obvious now, especially when you're working with like text generation data, like generative AI and text generation, because it's just so obvious to people now. But there's still algorithms that are being used to make health decisions that have hugely biased outcomes and biased and differential diagnoses for people based on race, ethnicity, gender. There's yet to be, I think, any type of candidate decision algorithm that reduces bias. I think the best case scenario we've seen is that it might just perpetuate business as usual biased decisions,
Right.
but it doesn't really solve the problem.
Right. It was interesting to me just thinking about what you're saying there. The survey also revealed that while there's a lot of concern about bias, there's not a lot of monitoring or performance checking happening at the moment. And so I'm going to come back to that point potentially with you, Tony, but I just want to quickly go to Stacy. On that question about why does it matter for us to really be so focused on this right now, what would your answer and response to that be?
Sure. So I have to first bring in, get a little nerdy. I have an academic background, and I think it's really important to note that everything is being kind of thrown into AI. But if you ask people, what is AI really, most people will offer you a different answer, right? And so AI is this overarching term that includes things, if you look at the categories of the work, it includes things, for example, like automation, content generation, which is where we get into generative AI. It includes things like decoding complex data sets when we move into machine learning. So there's a lot of different categories that belong to AI. That's the first point. And so it's really important that we recognize the reason this conversation has been catapulted into mainstream is really because of ChatGPT, which is a very small part of AI. AI has been used for years now, and it wasn't so interesting until recently because it hasn't been so accessible to the mainstream. So I think that's one reason we should be talking about it, because people you have to repeat over and over and over again for people to really understand what are we talking about. And now that we have tools that anyone can use who has access to a mobile phone or a computer, they should understand what's behind that to the best of anyone's given ability. But even the academics and the people who work on this every day aren't exactly unified about what it really is. So I think that's one reason. I think also we have to be honest about today's current climate. In a lot of places we see kind of populist themes taking over mainstream media. We see, if you will, really polarized opinions that are in the minority, but are being blown up to appear as if, majority opinions are in these polarized positions. And so that level of fear that we have in general around things that are foreign or different or new will also be a part of the AI conversation. And so to begin to do the work of reducing fear through education, that doesn't look good.
Getting ready for takeoff over there.
In order to reduce that fear or minimize that fear, we'll have to have these conversations.
Stacey, thank you for that. I think the segue for me to you, Tony, in our preparation conversation for this panel, you actually drew out fear and opportunity. There's the things that people are concerned about, but there's also massive opportunity in the moment. And so with AI being so much the topic of the moment, what are some of these considerations in the workplace? Some things that are scary for people and other things that are super promising for people. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I want to.
I think we're going to be okay in the back
right.
there, right?
Well, now, and I think the last question and this question, I kind of have the same answer to them a little bit in that.
Tony? Close.
Oh, sorry. The last question and this question, I kind of have the same answer for them in that, I mean, it's the internet. It's the iPhone. It's a thing that will change our lives in a way that we're not even going to realize for years. And the implications of this, I can't overstate it. I think on the positive side, from a productivity perspective, from an accessibility perspective, there are tremendous opportunities here. From the negative side, like we just talked about, bias, all of the things that have always been there from a historical perspective, they're in the data. They're inherently in the data, and they're going to be there in the data. I think the power here, I think, is in the opportunity for us to look at who's creating the data sets, what voices are represented in there. During the training and the validation processes, how are you making sure that the criteria that you're using and the outcomes you're trying to achieve look and feel inclusive? And I think the ability to ask the right question, everybody's talking about prompt design. Like your ability to type in the right thing and the right set of things to get the answer, and then to look at what comes out of it with some nuance and know that it's not the right answer, it's an input. Right. And I think that I use it every day now. I've gotten to the point where I do something either in BART or ChatGPT every day. I'm starting to play with Midjourney and DALL-E and whatnot. And I can't just take what it outputs and give it to somebody. I really got to think about it. And most of the time, it's 50, 60% right? But what that 50%, 60% gives me is something I never would have thought of in the first place. That's powerful.
It's like a major leg up, right? I think what's for me so fascinating is the creation of this prompt engineer role that never actually existed before. And I think the other thing that's really interesting is the fact that while productivity increases and efficiency is very much the focus, augmentation is probably where all the value is going to come from. And so one of the things that we really need to be thinking about is how to test and learn, how to experiment with AI. So, Stacey, if I could ask you, what are some of the experimentation that you are aware of that WPP is going to be doing in the area of machine learning or AI, or AI of any kind of caliber?
Sure. So going back to one of the examples I used earlier with Impact Index, which is being led by one of our media agencies, Mindshare. We're working closely with an academic institution to build that. We've tested it with 2 clients already. And really, essentially, what's tricky about it, or ever since I've had the opportunity to be a part of the project through the Racial Equity Program, where I'm pushing our academic partner is to say, okay, yeah, it's really easy to say, what's especially toxic on any given site and what is clearly matter of fact. What's not easy is
the show must go on.
What is much more challenging is the nuanced toxicity, really, right? The type of dog whistle. So if we think about examples of how Serena Williams was treated in different instances in comparison to her counterparts, or how we think about how Michelle Obama was treated during the first presidential campaign from Barack Obama, those things are much harder to really teach the algorithms. Where is the nuance here, right? So what we're trying to do with Impact Index is get that good at it. So beyond just obviously toxic, obviously matter of fact, how do we get into that, if you will, I wouldn't call it gray matter, but how do we get into that space that is not always easily definable? Because when I do my work, I also have to, as a human being speaking to other human beings, explain what's happening there. And it's not easy, right? If I'm talking to colleagues in France or Germany, I'm using very different examples than if I'm talking to colleagues in Brazil or South Africa to explain that nuance. And so to get to a place where the algorithms understand it, right? And that's, behind that is human understanding. That's how they learn. It's tricky.
It takes a lot of iteration, I'm sure.
Yes.
Mona, can you talk a little bit about some of the experimentation that's happening more specifically in the area closer to hiring?
Are you thinking specifically a greenhouse, or what we've been seeing outside, maybe around?
Anywhere you want to go with that.
So we've seen, I think, quite a few different routes, and we've taken a pretty firm stance at Greenhouse, like I mentioned, that we will not evaluate candidates in any way. We have seen in the industry that not everybody agrees with that. We do see, for example, different types of software that rank people, try to assign a singular quality score, and then try to put into like some type of numerical index the idea that.
Very sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. We have to do a break.
Yeah.
Because of that issue with the tent.
No worries.
Have the mic. I'm very sorry, all guests and attendees. We will have to make a break for a few minutes. Can you please gather towards the restaurant?